you have done an awesome blog post where you basically, we're just on it at the moment and we're going through it. It is one of the best explanations I've ever seen on a security topic, where you've gone through and you've explained in detail all the servers that are affected by it, how it works. Now, long story short, it appears that all of us in the Microsoft world are pretty safe. Well, our clients, when we investigated it all, was pretty safe. There was a couple of hosted providers that we used that weren't, but they patched it very quickly. But how bad is this virus?
Yeah, I guess it's a bug rather than a virus. But look, I mean, in terms of how bad, on the raw numbers, I guess the problem is that because of its prevalence in Apache, which is allegedly about 52% of the net, and Nginx, which is about 14% of the net, there's 2/3 of your internet that are running on web servers that use OpenSSL. So that's kind of, all right, that's our worst case scenario, 2/3. In fact, our worst case scenario is a little bit more than that, because sometimes we get ASP.NET websites, I'll rephrase that, we get IIS based websites wrapped in something else running OpenSSL. So Stack Overflow running HARProxy to do their various load balancing and interfacing between clients and servers. So we could actually get a bit of IIS on top of that 66%. But, you got to kind of rationalize it a little bit, because that's 66%. Okay, so now you've actually got to be running SSL. Okay, so that takes a big slice out of that 66%. Now you've got to be running a version of OpenSSL from within about the last 2 years. And we know how good everyone is at actually updating and patching their software. So now take out another great big chunk. So the figures that I've been seeing is probably more like about 17% of websites could have this risk. So that's still a lot, right? That's quite a large number. But then you got to have a lot of stuff line up to actually get it exploited. So one of the things is that you've actually got to have people sending traffic backwards and forwards that has something useful in it. So if you're just browsing around an HTTPS website and you're not authenticated or logging in or sending anything private, well, that's pretty worthless data. Where it gets more interesting is if you're logging in, and all right, so now we have credentials that might be at risk, or if you're already logged in, and that's probably the bigger risk, because you log in and you make one request, and if someone gets that one request, they get credentials. But then you browse around and you make all of these requests for pages and other assets on the pages, and you keep sending authentication tokens. So that's actually, in my view at least, a much bigger risk. So the really interesting thing, though, is when you actually see this work. So I downloaded one of the little projects, and there are many proof of concepts out there. I downloaded a little .NET one the other day and ran it against one of the websites that I'm responsible for that was running on Apache, and it's eye-opening, because you've got this console window there and it's just dumping data of anyone browsing via the website, credentials, cookies, tokens, all sorts of crazy stuff. So when you see it run, that's when I think the light bulb goes on and you go, oh man, this is actually really bad in terms of how easy it is. And
you showed a nice screenshot on your blog where you had you could see a Yahoo email address and a password, which had been blanked out. But it actually gets a lot worse, because you can get the private key, right?
Yeah, so the screen grab I showed, someone posted that up. Obviously, they got a hold of some stuff on Yahoo before they patched it. But imagine that as just a constant feed of data. And this is what you can do when you actually exploit it. And like I say, I did this after I wrote the blog post, but I ran it against one of our sites, and I just saw exactly what you see in that screen grab, just scrolling through at a fierce rate as people were browsing around. So the private keys one is interesting in a couple of ways. So first of all, if you get it, what can you actually do with it? Well, you can man in the middle someone's connection, but it's like, hey, I'm sitting here looking at every piece of traffic going through your server without man in the middling anyone anyway, right? So it's almost like a lesser evil. Yes, if I can get in the middle of someone's traffic, then I can intercept it and read it and do all that sort of thing. But that's really kind of not quite as bad as being able to read all the traffic remotely without getting in someone's connection. So that's part of it. The other side, of course, is that if you get private keys, you can go back and decrypt data that had been sent a month before, a year before, whenever the certificate was last signed. But the question you've got to ask then is who's actually storing this data? You know, who's storing masses of packet captures that are encrypted and that at the time they were capturing, they couldn't have read them? And the answer is, well, probably the NSA, who's in all our things anyway.
Didn't they say that, didn't they make an announcement saying they had nothing, that they weren't using that?
Oh, yeah. No, I believe them. Look, I mean, maybe they're not doing that, but they actually are doing the thing where they zoom the radio frequencies into your brain and reflect it back out. I don't know.
Right.
Like, they're doing so much absolutely crazy stuff anyway that this is like, this isn't used anymore.
Right.
But, you know, I guess the point is that, yes, you can go back and decrypt traffic, but you've got to have held that to begin with, and it's voluminous. And at the time you captured it, you couldn't do anything with it. So you've got to kind of be doing it on the assumption that maybe one day later on I'll be able to do something with it.
Right.
So I wouldn't discount it entirely, but that rules out a really broad range of threat actors. Hacktivists aren't going to have this. Career criminals probably aren't going to have this. You're pretty much back at nation states who have other tricks. But then in terms of, you know, okay, well, that's the hypothetical, but, you know, what's the actual likelihood of getting the keys? And there was a lot of debate early on, you know, can't you get the keys? So Cloudflare stood up a little competition on the weekend, and in fact, Cloudflare said, we don't think you can get the keys. We've got smart guys. We know a thing or two about, you know, sort of large websites and the mechanics inside them. We haven't been able to get it. And they stood up this competition, and two guys got it very quickly by what is obviously different means. So they haven't released how they've done it, but it has now been pretty emphatically proven that you can pull private keys using the vulnerability. Right. So it's not easy, but it's possible. So, and then you've actually got to be able to do something with it.
So I'd like to ask you, even when a company has fixed their problem, if you are using Chrome, you are still vulnerable, but if you're using IE, you're now safe because the certificate has been revoked by default. Do you want to talk about that?
Certificate revocation.
Yes.
So by default, Chrome is not going to check these CRLs, the certificate revocation lists, whereas IE will. And it sounds like there's even some semantics in there, because Eric Lawrence pulled me up on something about what IE actually does.
Who's Eric Lawrence?
So Eric Lawrence was on the Internet Explorer team at Microsoft. He's at Telerik now. He's the guy who built Fiddler. Right. So he knows as well as anybody about what actually goes on inside these things. But the other thing is that the certificate revocations, it sounds like in many cases it does cost money, because when you revoke a certificate, you've then got to, you know, the certificate authorities then got to publish the fact that it's revoked, and they do that via these certificate revocation lists. That's one way at least. So, you know, how many people are actually actively revoking it, and then how are the browsers actually checking for it? But, you know, on the other hand, if they're rekeying the certificate anyway, well, you know, all the new traffic's going through with a different key, so if you had the old one, it probably doesn't matter too much.
So it doesn't matter if you're using IE or Chrome, they're both as safe as each other?
Yeah, well...
Because that's not what your blog indicates.
It depends who you read. So, I mean, to me, on the surface of it, Chrome won't check, IE will check, but it sounds like there are semantics then within there.
Right.
And to be honest, I didn't even look at Safari on iOS, which is a whole heap of traffic now. I didn't look at Firefox. The point is that it's an inconsistent implementation.
Right. Okay. All right. That is awesome. Any other things worth mentioning? Has this been your most popular blog post, or one of them?
Yeah. So I published it on I published it just under a week ago because it was later on Wednesday night last week, and it's had a couple of 100,000 views, so it's been quite popular.
Wow.
So actually, that is the most popular thing. But look, I mean, in terms of anything else, I think the thing now is wait and see how much other stuff comes out of the woodwork that's running OpenSSL. So we're starting to hear about Android versions that run it. I'm interested in all the devices that have OpenSSL running somewhere in a non-upgradable fashion. So I've got a pair of those Withings bathroom scales, you know, the ones where every time you weigh yourself, it talks to an API.
Yes.
I don't know how I'm going to update that sucker if it's running OpenSSL. Like, how do you patch your bathroom scales, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff that's going to be in that category. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds now.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Thank you very much, Troy, for that explanation, and I think you'll have a few more followers on your blog after this.
No worries.
Okay.
Thanks very much for that, Adam.
Cheers.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.